Welcome to Mr. Rodman's Top 12 Highlights of Chapter 10, looking at the media and its relation to American government and U.S. politics. So let's jump right into number one, mass media, also called the Fourth Estate. We're looking at newspapers, magazines, radio, news organizations, television, the internet, which encompasses all of those things and their presence on the internet, as well as films, recordings, books, electronic communications, all these types of things that relate to mass media. This is essentially the media as a whole in terms of how people get their message out. The news media is referring to the portion of this in which we're getting news. We're being informed with sources and information that is vital, that is real, that can be sourced and can be taken back to the sources to find out what that is. We have a lot of blurry area, gray area, especially in this election season, between news and entertainment, or what we're hearing a lot about this year is fake news, which we've talked about in class. And this idea of this gray area is because you don't know what to believe. You don't know who is telling you the truth and what parts are fact and what parts are fiction. So that's really important, and especially with the emergence of the internet, it's a lot easier to get messages out, but it's a lot easier to get false information out too. And this is where fake news comes from. Unfortunately, the only way to check that out is to do some digging and to think for yourself and look at what sources this is coming from and how to get your news. And again, you can look on Google Classroom and find several news sources that I've posted for you that we talked about in class in relation to how do we determine if news is real or fake, and how can we make sure that what we're reading is actual real news. A number of sources, from the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post to National Public Radio, did stories on this, and I've also included kind of a cheat sheet from a study that was done by Stanford University and shared with a number of teachers across the country in terms of how students can think for themselves in looking at these sources. So that's really important in terms of the role of the internet here. So the internet is a double-edged sword. It's a great thing in terms of getting information out, but it's a bad thing in terms of what information that you're getting and how you may or may not be taking it at face value or digging into the details. And that's an important component here. Television has also changed us in terms of things being more visual, everything from memes that we talked about they talk about on the internet, to showing a train wreck, showing the crisis, showing what's happening. Unfortunately, that leads to less substance, less investigatory news, and trying to get into this 24-hour news cycle. How do we get the news out and report it right away? Sometimes we cut corners. We, being reporters in television and radio, cut corners in order to get first to the story. And we're the first to report this breaking news. We have an exclusive report coming to you live from the scene. All of these things, in order to get the message out there right away, they do have an advantage over newspapers and magazines and print reporting in the internet. But the problem with that is sometimes they cut corners by not checking sources, not verifying those sources, and sometimes they end up having to print corrections or retractions for a story or a quote because they're wrong and they didn't substantiate it. And so we can get fake news on television just as easy as we can get fake news on the internet. So it's really important to understand your sources and make sure that they're reliable. Again, that goes back to what we talked about in class. Sound bites have been shrinking over the last 50 years. We've seen an incredibly shrinking soundbite from going from over almost a minute, 43 seconds, to now where it's very, very short. So in some cases, if you get 5 or 6 seconds of a soundbite, that's a lot, and that has changed because of the role that we're on the go, we're on the move, and eyeballs are moving from one thing to another. We can't sit through 43 seconds of a soundbite to wait to see what happens. We need to know now, we need to move on to the next story. And so that's where the shrinking soundbite has given us less intensive coverage and more of the superficial kind of hit the headlines and go from there. Narrowcasting has also come about as a result of this. The narrowcasting, the idea that we're selectively exposed to resources we like because they tell us what we want to hear. They tell us the perspective that we want to hear and what we want to see. And we see this in a number of places in terms of Fox News and MSNBC as two examples. Fox News giving you more the conservative bent, MSNBC giving you more the liberal bent, and we see this over and over again in terms of that narrowcasting. And it's because that's what drives the eyeballs. If we weren't watching it, reading it, looking at it, and responding to it, they wouldn't be reporting it, and they wouldn't be so successful with advertisers, which is why it's there. So are they feeding the beast? In some ways they are. Newspapers and news magazines, on the other hand, have seen a decline in circulation. It continues to drop, and that has definitely hurt them. They have turned to the internet for more sources of revenue. That has tended to help. I would say their online presence is just as important, if not more, than what they're doing in print these days. A good example of this was Newsweek. Newsweek transitioned to the Daily Beast, again a more liberal bent, but they went completely online. They no longer print a Newsweek magazine, and they did this a year or two ago because of the declining revenue. And they've obviously adopted a business model that is profitable now for them by doing it online, but they did away with the print version altogether. And the internet has changed in terms of that advertising, and we see that again and again. We also see that sensationalism, that idea of if it bleeds, it leads, and trying to get those headlines that really get your eyeballs to the ads and to the articles. So what is the role and the function of the media? Dr. Magleby talks about this in the textbook, and the real importance here in terms of how does it relate to American government? Well, if they're the fourth estate and they're supposed to be the watchdog, we're relying on them to be credible and to have some integrity in terms of what they're reporting. They're also providing a forum for people to vent their views, and those views, especially if they're in the minority, to be expressed and to kind of air those grievances in the public forum. They're also looking at problems in government. What impact is it having on people out there in the field, in the states? What impact is it having on them and their lives? How is government impacting them? This is the role that the media plays. There is a role of entertainment here, and a semblance of that, and we see a lot of that, not just in entertainment news, but in entertaining things like the example I gave in class. Do they cover a policy speech by a member of Congress, or when the member of Congress falls down the stairs and breaks his leg? That tends to be what gets reported. And I mean, look at YouTube and the cat videos. Those eyeballs tend to go to cat videos, but they're not looking at policy speeches on YouTube. They're looking at entertainment, and the news media know that. They know that's where the advertising dollars are going, because that's where people are looking and spending more time. Facebook's looking at this in terms of games and gaming and social media aspects. Why are they so intent on making sure that fake news isn't perpetrated on their medium? It's because they want to drive those advertisers and eyeballs to those advertisers in order to generate revenue, and they know that to do that they've got to get a handle on fake news. And this also comes back to political socialization, what we talked about in Unit 2, the importance here of people getting their news and getting more information about what's going on in government from these media sources. They are our linkage institution in many ways to our government. We hear it from interest groups, we hear it from our family and church and religion and other resources, but the media plays a really important linkage institution role here. So how do we know if it's objective? That's a real important piece here. The 20th century journalism tended to trend towards the idea of independence and looking at more objective journalism. Now, we didn't start out that way. It was very sensationalistic. The yellow journalism of the Spanish-American War, you give me the pictures, I'll give you the war, was kind of the sensationalistic approach. And the reason for that was to sell newspapers. They wanted people to buy the newspaper and read all about the articles. Well, they had to sensationalize in order to do that. And this sounds very similar to what we see today with Facebook or Twitter, or Snapchat or Instagram, trying to sensationalize to some extent. And now there's a backlash of it. The idea of fake news. A lot of the yellow journalism could be described as fake news. And where is this coming from? Because people are saying enough is enough. Some of this objective journalism isn't objective anymore. And you're tainting your site, and advertisers are mad because the public is upset about it. So that's definitely changed, and we're seeing some reaction to that. Wire services like the AP, which is called stands for the Associated Press, is basically pretty highly regarded in terms of trying to be objective, trying to use solid sources, use quotes that have been verified, and it's not going across the wires in those headlines if it's not objective and it's not been verified and reported. And they tend to be the news leader in terms of that nationwide or worldwide global approach to objective news. So we do see a return to that objective journalism, even though there is a lot of fake news out there. Investigative journalism is this idea of the Watergate scandal, the Woodward and Bernstein approach, as we see here in the picture. They investigated Watergate. They were not the reporters assigned to watch to the White House. They weren't the correspondents in the White House. It was reporters from the Washington Post outside the White House that actually uncovered this scandal. Sometimes reporters are too close, as we talked about with the Brian Williams paying for President Obama's Five Guys burger. Sometimes they're too close and they can't see the forest for the trees. But the Watergate scandal was definitely exposing the media to concerns that government didn't want you to know about, but reporters were uncovering. And it really led to this idea of a watchdog, the fourth estate, this adversarial press that we see here. And while the adversarial press continues, what we have seen is a consolidation of media. A number of magazines, newspapers, internet news, and other resources that have actually been consolidated under a few owners, more of an oligopoly, a larger group that's owning it, and less independence. It's harder for them to survive. Now, the good news is that the advent of the internet is making it easier for independent news sources to take off and to launch new resources. Politico is one that we didn't see 10 years ago, and it has launched, and some of the Washington Post editors and reporters that were at the Washington Post went to Politico to really kind of start it from the, hit the ground running kind of thing and start it from the ground up. But that's a rarity. We tend to see more consolidation of media today, which means the internet story that is covered on the Washington Post is also covered on WashingtonPost.com. It may be shared under other resources that they have, other news services that they provide in other outlets. So definitely a consolidation, as we have seen here time and again under different news sources. We, as a result of that and this idea of narrowcasting, we have fragmented media. We go to ESPN for our sports. We go to CNBC for our business news. All of these cable channels aren't regulated the same way that the public airwaves were regulated. There's a different standard in which they're judged, and sometimes there's a lot more leeway for them to get away with things that they couldn't have gotten away with otherwise. Sirius XM radio is a good example of that. Where did Howard Stern go when he was fined by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission? Where did he go? He went to Sirius XM, where there were less regulations around what he could say, what language he could use without being fined by the FCC every time he turned around. So that does kind of change the game, and especially when it comes to trying to prove libel, and especially with a political figure or a public figure, that's almost impossible to prove today. We also have an issue where we don't have prior restraint. A prior restraint in the school sense is when the school steps in and basically regulates what the school newspaper can say or what the school yearbook can say. We don't have that in Montgomery County, by the way. We don't have prior restraint, but and we don't see it in the government sense in terms of the government coming in and restraining media. And you're probably thinking right now, well, why are you even bringing that up, Mr. Rodman, if we don't have it? Because places like China do, and they regulate a lot of those U.S. resources where we may look at something and think, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Why would somebody regulate that? But in another country, they may be limiting that, and they have censors that may be doing that. So just because it's done here in the United States doesn't mean that it's done around the world. And China is, or North Korea is probably a really good example, or a couple of good examples about that. So we've talked about the role of the media as a watchdog in terms of that investigation. They're also gatekeepers in terms of influencing the policy agenda. What's important? If it bleeds, it leads. What's going to be on the front page of the WashingtonPost.com? What's going to be on the front page of Politico.com? What's going to be on the front page of NBC or MSNBC or Fox News? They're the gatekeepers. They're determining what's prioritized and what's important. They're also going to be the scorekeepers. They're tracking the reputation. And this is where the bias comes in. The reputation of a politician, an elected official, who is who's lying to them, and the ongoing Twitter war with President-elect Donald Trump is a good example of that in terms of how they're covering it. So they do keep score, and you know, contrary to popular opinion, they do keep score, and the media bias that is there, they do keep track of that, and it is reflected in some of their future news stories. So it's important to keep that in mind. Um, Obviously, the news coverage in presidential campaigns is really extensive. We talked about the horse race journalism in class related to the team challenge. Bernie Sanders is in the lead. No, Hillary Clinton is not far behind. Oh, here comes Martin O'Malley. Oh, Donald Trump is in the lead. Ted Cruz not far behind. Here comes little Marco. He's gaining on Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. No, wait, we've got another player in the House. It's Jeb Bush, and he's making progress in South Carolina. This is the horse race. They're basically announcing who's in the lead, who's in second, who's in third, and they love this sort of thing. Why? Because it's great news. It gets the eyeballs. It gets the people watching and reading about it. Who wants to read about a policy speech? They won't even cover it in video clips, let alone in a print article. But the horse race, that's a lot of fun. People love to see who's in the lead today. What have the latest polls shown us? Even though the polls mean nothing. And that is also what's led to those shorter sound bites, those shrinking, incredibly shrinking sound bites, because they don't want to sit there and cover lots of details. They want to hit the ground, cover the surface, delve a little deeply in a quote or two, and then move on. And that's where news coverage can really make the difference. And those smaller races are indicative of that as well. If they can get a little news coverage from a major media outlet, then that may change the game. Lastly, in terms of the role of the media, we tend to see this, and we definitely saw this in the 2016 campaign. Who are the stars of the media? Who is using the bully pulpit, so to speak, in terms of I've got this message I'm going to get out, and when the president talks, people listen. President Obama got out there and talked about the bully pulpit, talked about the fact that he thought Donald Trump wasn't the best candidate for the role, and really advocated for Hillary Clinton. He did tend to stay out of the race when it was Bernie versus Hillary. But he definitely jumped in when it was Hillary versus Donald Trump. And so the president is using that bully pulpit in order to set the agenda. The president also does this in terms of not just in the election coverage, but in terms of what the president wants to get out there. The president talks about something, it matters. The president-elect Trump talked about Boeing and the agreement to build the new Air Force One and how expensive it was going to be. All of a sudden, the stock price of Boeing was dropping, and this is because of the bully pulpit. It's a very powerful tool. When the president or the president-elect speaks, people pay attention. Markets move as a result of that, and that's really important for the president to keep in mind. The other aspect here that's important to keep in mind is the trial balloon. A president may test a topic or throw something out there through a media source that he goes off the record and says, okay, you can print it, go ahead, we'll let you run with it. And if it works and people like it, then they'll confirm the story. If they don't like it and it's getting negative press and people hate the idea, then that's a lot of times where the president or the president's staff will disavow that the president ever mentioned that. That is totally not true. That is false information. Not sure where that reporter got that information. And that's what we call a trial balloon. The president's coverage tends to be all over the map in terms of positive, negative. Congress, definitely more negative. And we can see that reflected in the polls, the Gallup polls about Congress. They're in the teens, if they're even that high. People tend to rally around the president, but not so much around Congress. Even the Supreme Court does well in terms of polling by the American people. But Congress tends to be the punching bag that we see. Now, if the economy goes south, that's a different story. We blame the president. But if the economy is doing well, then everybody wins. So Congress tends to get more negative reaction as a result of that. And then lastly, I just want to cover the idea of selective exposure. Remember, we talked about this with narrowcasting. People are screening out things that they don't want to pay attention to. I don't want to hear about the other side. I don't want to hear what they're doing. I want to hear news that basically makes me feel better about the way I believe. And that goes back to that selective perception. What do I want in those media messages? I'm going to expose my time that I'm spending in front of the media to those resources, those narrowcast, that fragmented media that is conforming to my interests and my viewpoints, my ideology, so to speak. So how has the government, the government news and the coverage of that by the media changed in the last 50 years, which is really where the College Board tends to focus, is that last 50 years, what has changed? And the important piece here to note is that it's more adversarial. People are definitely more mistrustful. The days of the Watergate are over, in which we trust government and what they're saying. It's more sensationalistic, and this gives rise to fake news and the idea that there's more sensationalism out there. We also see shorter sound bites. We're not as patient to sit through a 40-second soundbite anymore. It's also about the horse race. We love the horse race coverage in terms of who's in the lead, who's in second, who's in third, who's in first today, and really a candidate-centered campaign. It's not about the issues anymore. It's about who are those people. I always tell students that it's not about whether someone's running for re-election. It's who are they running against, because it doesn't matter that you may like or not like this person. It matters who they're running against and whether you like them more or less. And that is Chapter 10 and the top 12 highlights from Mr. Rodman. Hope this helps. Good luck on the quiz, test, AP exam, whatever you're using this for to review, and live the 5.